So I'm delighted now to bring a real scientist to share some thoughts with you. Professor Heather KOLDEWEY from the ZSL, University of Exeter, Bertarelli, Ocean. I will hand over to the wonderful Heather KOLDEWEY. Should
I use this one as well?
I think so, yeah.
Some notes. Thank you very much. Yes, as Oliver said, I'm Heather KOLDEWEY. I lead the Bertarelli Foundation's Marine Science Programme based in the Indian Ocean, and I'm Head of Ocean at the Zoological Society of London and Professor at the University of Exeter based in Cornwall. So yes, I have the ologies, and I work in ocean science and marine conservation. But my question today, and thinking about talking to a mix of people in the room of different backgrounds, I know I'm with an elephant person who invited me here in Belinda. I know my sister, who rides horses for a living, is also listening. So trying to think about who can save the ocean and how do we go about doing that? So you might start off by thinking, well, she's got her clipboard looking very important underwater. That's me at work. It's a hell of a job. I'm a shallow scientist, unlike Oliver and his colleagues. I'm also in nice tropical waters, unlike Lisa, and happily doing my bit to see what we can do by collecting the data that we need to take action. You might think it's this guy. If you're thinking about what a really clever scientist is doing, he's definitely got the answers to see what we can do to save the ocean. But what about this catwalk model? And who actually can save the ocean? Well, some years ago, I started to think differently about how we do go about saving the ocean. And while there's brilliant scientists doing brilliant things for the ocean, we actually need to think a lot more broadly than that. And that came from starting a project with Selfridges department store in London, which I'd never actually been to until this collaboration, but I didn't tell them that, obviously. And my boss met the creative director of Selfridges at the time at the Climate Change Summit, where they were both pretty ranty about what was happening with the planet. My boss at London was saying, you know, we've got all the science, we know what's going wrong, we need to fix it, you know, what can we do? And summary of her response was basically, you know, scientists identify problems, not solutions. They spend a lot of time talking to each other, and they're pretty boring. So he turned that round to her and said, well, Selfridges, you know, is creative, you're interesting, you're always creating new trends, and you reach a different audience. What can we do together? And in 2011, we built a partnership that actually went on for 10 years about Project Ocean. So that was, how could we use Selfridges to tell more stories about the ocean? And this is what it looked like. So this is how that was interpreted. What was really challenging and interesting for me as a scientist is they said, we have 12 windows on Oxford Street. You'll have people who are on a bus going by or running in at lunchtime to buy a lipstick. What 12 messages do you want to tell about the ocean? And as a scientist who loves thinking about, statistics and detail and being accurate, it's actually really challenging to do. But this was one of our windows. So southern bluefin tuna, more endangered than a panda. Would you eat a panda? And this was just thinking about how we can prompt some questions about oceans and ocean conservation. Being creative, obviously, we were able to bring elements of ocean, including Lady Gaga's lobster hat, into the store, perhaps more of a comfort zone. But that allowed us to run a series of events that we could actually talk about ocean issues to Selfridges customers rather than people who would go and listen to a scientific lecture. But it was more than just a creative piece, it was walking the talk. So in that first year, in 2011, Selfridges changed all of the seafood in their restaurants, as well as in all of their contractors, to sustainable seafood. They also helped set up marine protected areas. In 2013, they got rid of all deep sea shark liver oil out of beauty products. They got rid of that in the store. And in 2015, we started to tackle ocean plastics. And that was by getting rid of all single-use plastic water bottles, again, throughout the store and in all of the franchises that they have within the building, enabling us to have conversations at that time about plastic pollution in a very cool water bar that they set up. So this was one really interesting way to say, okay, this is not just about explaining what's going wrong, but actually encouraging change. And the reason that Project Ocean ended after 10 years is because they moved on to much bigger things. By that initial start point, they started addressing climate, they started addressing what was going on land, they looked at the whole sustainability gambit and came up with this retail activism of what difference can you make. Now, we've heard brilliantly about the challenges of plastic pollution and what we are doing, with plastic bottles being one of those key items. But for many years, over 2 decades, I've worked in the Philippines. Now, this is a country made up of 7,700 islands, and in many of these islands, there is zero waste infrastructure. So what you end up seeing is islands like this made increasingly of plastic. Plastic bottles last 200 years, more or more. Many plastic items last hundreds or thousands of years. And so you start to see islands where they're more and more made up of plastic. But one person's plastic is another person's treasure. And we were working with many of these fishing communities in the Philippines, looking at marine conservation and marine sustainability. And we're fortunate to be invited to a workshop by the world's leading carpet tile manufacturer, Interface. This is another connection. So if you get asked to a weird workshop, say yes, especially if it's by a carpet tile manufacturer. And what it turns out is most fishing nets are made of, that's a major source of plastic pollution in the ocean. It's also made of nylon 6, which is an incredibly high-grade nylon that is on the moldings inside of your car, it's on pens, it's on all sorts of things. Now, we had lots of waste fishing nets on the beaches in the Philippines and being used every day by the fishermen, and they wanted this material for their carpets. And they'd already worked with a company called Econil that regenerates waste nets into yarn that could then be used to make products like carpet. And then that enters a circular economy. So that carpet at the end of the life makes new carpet and so on and so on. And that's obviously the ideal situation that we're looking for. So what we wanted to do was to look at how could we connect this waste product causing all of these problems in the communities in the Philippines with the companies that wanted to use them. And we started with a research piece, firstly realized there was loads and loads and loads of these nets, and then looked at how we made that supply chain. How do you actually practically do that? So that was working with community groups to collect those nets and clean them. We then had to work out how to package nets, which are very puffy and light, into a form. This is when we brought in other connections with engineers who worked in places without electricity to design a net baler. This uses technology of a car jack and a wine press, if you're wondering, to come up with really efficient bales that could be shipped across from these different islands and aggregated to the point that they could be moved. Now just think, if you just look at this one truck, this is one part of a 10-truck shipment, of one shipment. This is all waste net that would be either on the beaches or drifting around in the ocean, catching fish that nobody benefits from. Now we had to commercial operation. We had to look at it as a business model to see how that would work. So we used trucks that were bringing in bamboo for construction and started taking the waste nets out of that, and then packed them into the containers where they were shipped, regenerated into that yarn, and ended up as carpet tiles. Now, many of these communities have no access to financial services. They're living on an average about $600 a year. And so we had to look at the mechanics of selling the nets that would anchor the benefit in those communities. And we did this by, again, looking outside of our marine conservation box to the development sector that Record and developed with the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation had developed this community banking, the village saving and loan associations, and used the buying and the selling of the nets to underpin this whole little business model. To date, we've ended up collecting and moving about enough net. The quantity of nets equates to wrapping around the world 10 times. We benefited 64,000 families. And we've developed this model that has had some challenges, particularly through COVID, with changes in shipping and logistics and infrastructure, but also is one to replicate. Now, the other key business in these communities, as well as fishing, is seaweed farming. Now, the seaweed is to make carrageenan, which all of you will have probably used today, whether you know it or not, in your toothpaste, in shampoo, it's in many food products as a stabilizer, it's even a fire retardant, and it's in ice cream. So carrageenan, again, is used globally, and we, again, had this opportunity to look at how we create supply chains. So this has been a project running at ZSL for many years. It actually got to the point with the seaweed farming that it needed to spin out to be a business, to be a social enterprise that could reach scale. And this is now called Coast 4C. And this is focused on this. The nets is still running in the background, but has really ramped up through the access of these communities, these seaweed farmers, to do the seaweed farming sustainably and connect it to marine conservation by setting up bigger and better marine protected areas. And what was really exciting is just 2 weeks ago, what started as a sort of research project has been nominated as one of the finalists for the Earthshot Prize, the environmental Oscars, which is, so thank you. And this is run by an amazing team of Filipinos. So this is really locally grown, locally led. So let's look at these other connections. We've talked about the global connections of business. We've talked about different sectors. But let's look at it from as we stand on land, from the island ocean point of view. Now, this is Nick, a very clever professor at Lancaster University, and this is Pete, a very clever former PhD student of mine, an ex-Marine, which is a brilliant combination, who's a seabird fanatic. Now, what we find is in our science, we can quite easily end up in silos. We focus in on the bits that we know about, and we work on those. These two were waiting to be picked up off an island that was full of seabirds like this, which is basically incredibly noisy and stinks of poo. Now, on some of these islands, you don't see many seabirds, neighboring islands, and the reason for that is rats. Now, rats eat eggs, they eat chicks, and they completely change the system. And they started chatting and started thinking about this. Now, if we know that if you get rid of rats, and there's many fantastic projects around the world working on this, that it makes a huge difference to these island ecosystems. So this is Redonda Island in Antigua and Barbuda. If you look on the left, that was before the rats and goats were removed, and if you look on the right, that's after. Seed banks were suppressed under the soil that as soon as that grazing pressure was off, started to emerge. The birds came back. Endemic species that were down to the last few started flourishing. This is an amazing way of protecting and storing wildlife. But what Nick and Pete were chatting about on that island is what happens off the islands. Now, their research has shown that the seabirds fly off to the sea, they eat fish out at sea, they bring that back, they poop on the islands, but that provides natural fertilizer into the ocean. And several years of research and some fantastic team of researchers working on this has shown that off islands with healthy seabird populations, the corals grow 4 times faster than those islands with rats. There's 50% more fish on islands with healthy seabird populations. And even the fish behave differently. This little damselfish has much bigger gardens and behaves in a completely different way of aggression with or without rats. The corals also recover quicker after climate change. So after sort of bleaching events. So a very quick way we can help conserve coral reefs and protect and restore the environment is save a reef is to kill a rat. This also shows we need to think about connections. We need to move out of our silos, out of our areas of familiarity, and think holistically about the environment. So this is something that is very embedded in culture. If you talk to any indigenous communities on islands, they have a very clear sense of what's going on in the sky and on the land and how that's affecting the sea. And our traditional Western science is really opening up much more now to look at local ecological knowledge, to really listen and understand that science isn't being in a lab, it's not being underwater with a dive cylinder and a clipboard, or it's not being in some kind of high-tech situation, that there's a huge amount to learn by listening across all sectors of art and science. The challenge I have working at an Indian Ocean level, this is working with many different organizations, is how do we tell those stories of what's going on in the least studied ocean, the least protected, the least well-regulated, and surrounded by a huge diversity of countries. And that's something that we've been thinking about how we can do more. One of the ways we did that was to bring together environmental journalists from around the Indian Ocean region. So we had journalists who all lived in coastal nations ranging from Tanzania and Somalia to Sri Lanka and India, to the Maldives and the Seychelles, but did not know how to tell and write stories about the ocean. They actually mostly couldn't swim. And so we brought them for an ocean experience to learn how to tell ocean stories and to write about their local stories of the ocean, to access local scientists who are doing amazing things from the ocean and not always look internationally. And that involved getting them initially just off the local beach in the morning to learn how to use a snorkel and mask, to end up swimming with magnificent manta rays. Now, this life-changing experience of being in the ocean with these incredible animals has developed this amazing cohort of journalists who now regularly write incredible stories about the ocean. Now, I'm not naturally artistic, and I think it is where and how we tell stories which is so important. And actually, with Carly from Schmidt Ocean Institute, last year, we brought some of our science stories, these stories of the island ocean connections, to Art Basel in Miami, which was an incredible experience to bring those narratives. This is Shanna Challenger. She's from Redonda. She was the one who was involved in that goat and rat eradication there, told a remarkable story of how you remove goats off an island with woggles, swim woggles on in helicopters. Absolutely incredible. And she told that story of what's involved and the art of saving the ocean. So if we think back about who's going to save the ocean, is it the scientist? Is it the artist? Is it the lawyer? Is it the business person? Basically, I would argue that it's really down to everybody, that everybody in this room, everybody that you speak to, has a skill that is relevant to saving the ocean, and that we can all do it. Thank you.